democratic values, such as protecting human rights. We regularly engage with our Indian partners on these shared values, and to that end, we're monitoring some recent concerning developments in India, including a rise in human rights abuses by some government, police, and prison officials.
I'm going to be talking about something that's not really widely talked about in YouTube at the moment, so I'm going to raise it. I'm going to be talking about how the high oil prices are affecting the Indian economy, and why I think Indian economy is in serious danger if the oil prices carries on rising as it is, having serious issues with its economy and GDP growth, and it could even head to recession if the oil prices carry on rising as they are rising. So I'm going to be talking about this topic today, and also Blinken's recent 2+2 meeting, and also Biden's meeting with Modi as well. So before I start, don't forget to like, share, subscribe. You know what to do to help the algorithm. And if you like the video, and if you really like the channel and you want to help me grow, you're welcome to join my Patreon or buy me a coffee. So recently there was the 2+2 meeting where the American admin, including Biden, Blinken, Lloyd Austin, met up with their Indian counterparts, and Modi was on a teleconference screen. So America had been trying to push India to go against Russia for some time now. India has bought a little bit of oil from Russia at a discounted price, and Americans have not been happy. It's very much double standards because the Europeans are still buying oil and gas from Russia, and what India buys is very, very small in comparison. So I just think it's very, very double standards of the Americans to ask India to not to buy from the Russians. Firstly, because India doesn't create gas or oil on its own. I mean, it does create very small amount, but it's not enough to fire up its industry. So India needs to import a lot of gas, it needs to import a lot of oil, and it's very bad for India's economy if it has to pay really, really high gas prices and really high oil prices. So India needs to look after its own interest, and obviously America is not very happy with that. They want India not only to stop buying oil from Russia, but to seize any businesses with Russia, stop buying weapons from Russia, because recently Americans have not been happy with India when it came to buying an S-400 anti-aircraft system. So India is not in America's good books at the moment, and Biden recently called them very shaky. So it's very much some cause for concern. So in this meeting, Modi has been standing strong. He's been standing with Russia, and he hasn't given up to any sorts of pressures from the United States, and he hasn't given up in any pressures from Biden himself or Blinken. However, when Blinken stood up on stage, he basically started talking about human rights issues in India, and this brought shockwaves around India, and every single Indian paper has brought this up, and this is the first time America has actually brought up human rights issues in India. So this is pretty much standard with the United States. If you are a United States friend, they ignore any human rights violations, but when you're on the wrong side of the United States, they start bringing up the human rights issues. For example, when it comes to China, everything was ignored. Nobody even mentioned the Uyghurs when the United States was getting along with China. As soon as Trump started the trade war with China, as soon as things started falling pear-shaped in their relationship, things like Uyghur and stuff like that came at the forefront on every single front page on every single country. And I must admit, even India was going along with the bandwagon as well, with websites such as WeOn and Gravitas and things like that. So it seems like America is now going to be targeting India when it comes to human rights. However, my personal opinion, this is a really, really bad move from America. I think America needs to be very, very careful how they deal with India. because if they start placing sanctions on India, if they start using this kind of language to India, there's a big danger that India could go towards China. I mean, it's basically America's policy which had pushed Russia into China's arms, and it could be American policy again, which could push India into China's arms as well. However, there are big issues between India and China, and unless they sort out their border issues, I don't think they're going to be friends anytime soon. The issue with Russia and China, they sorted out their border issues long time ago, so it's very easy for them to get closer and become friends. However, unless India and China sort out their border issues, I don't think they'll be friends anytime soon, and America knows that. America knows already. However, if America still keeps insisting on pushing India, giving sanctions, for example, treating them with harsh language, I believe India and China will come together and they'll try and work out a solution to their border issue and probably become friends in the future. You never know. But I think America needs to be very, very careful how it deals with India, because America needs India for a number of reasons. It needs India for the Quad, and it needs India to contain China as well. Kissinger once said that to be a friend of the United States is a very, very fatal thing to do. So I'm going to talk a bit about India and why I think India is in big trouble, not only because America's falling out of favor with India, but for other reasons as well. So you can see from this article, India is projected to go from 2.7 trillion GDP in 2021 to 8.4 trillion by 2030. So we're on 2022 at the moment, and I like to say that this is quite an optimistic figure, and I want to show you the GDP of India over the past 7-8 years. So you can see from 2016 to 2017, India made a huge leap in their GDP. However, from 2017 all the way to 2022, there hasn't been much of a rise. It's gone from 2.6 trillion to around 2.8, 2.9 trillion. And if you count the last 6 years, where it's only risen by about 0.2, 0.3 trillion, I just don't understand how from here it can go up to 8 trillion. I mean, even with the current growth rates, it's impossible. So I don't know why those figures are so optimistic. I mean, there's obviously outside issues as well that people are not taking into account. There is obviously the coronavirus, and there's still a danger that new variants might still come about. So we haven't seen the end of the coronavirus just yet. And things like the Ukrainian war is going to cause huge issues with the Indian economy. Everything's rising in terms of inflation, gas prices, oil prices, cost of commodities, raw materials. So that's going to affect Indian economy. Geopolitics is also going to be affecting it. And when I say geopolitics, I mean if things go out of favor with the United States, they can make things very, very difficult for India, as they've made things very difficult for China, for example. And China's got so many sanctions by America to stop their growth. If America did the same thing to India, it could seriously harm Indian GDP growth. And also, you got to look at climate change as well. Climate change, the earth is getting hotter and hotter, and the climate in India is getting hotter and hotter as well. So they are saying already India has broken records at the moment in terms of temperature this month. And if things carry on moving the way they're moving, there could be huge droughts in India as well. And you also got to look at power levels as well. So there's an article here that India is going to be suffering from power shortage in the summer due to extended coal supply crisis and also increased demand as well. Most of the power in India are coal powered, And if you're going to have an increase of industry, increase of factories, you obviously need more power. And if India doesn't have enough power, that could. So if this power shortage happens on a regular basis, you'll see huge issues with India's industry. A lot of factories will have to be shut down. A lot of people will be without power, and that's going to affect India's GDP growth. It's going to stop foreign investments, and a lot of factories, foreign factories which are already in India, will start to look at moving out of India. And so that is a huge issue. And India is again very much a coal power nation. They use huge amounts of coal to fire up the industries. So that is a huge problem at the moment. And finally, you have to look at India's supply chain. India does not have access to a lot of the raw materials around the world, so it has to import a lot of the raw materials, commodities, oil, gas. It is a net importer, and for India to be a factory of the world, it needs to have full access to a lot of these raw materials, which it doesn't have. And secondly, the other issue is to ship all of these goods to Europe or ship them to America. It's actually a much longer process because India geographically is in the Indian Ocean, which is if you need to go through to Europe, there is various chokeholds you need to go through. Plus, it's very, very expensive at the moment to ship goods across to Europe. And if you want to ship goods across to America, again, you've got to go through a number of choke points. For example, the Malacca Strait and a few other choke points around the world as well. Now I'm going to come to the main part of the show. I'm going to be talking about the Indian rupee and why it's been falling and why it's a huge danger to India at the moment. And plus I'm going to be talking about the high oil prices. And if the oil prices keep rising the way they're rising, India is in serious trouble. And as you can see, the Indian rupee has been falling against the dollar for a number of years now, and a lot of people are not really talking about this, and I feel that India is in a major problem at the moment, because the fact is the Indian rupee is losing value against the dollar. However, India is the third largest importer of oil and gas, and they need that for its growing population. They have 1.4 billion people in India, and very much a growing industry. Over the past few years, they have been growing in terms of industry more and more. There's more and more factories popping up in India. There's more investments happening from the world going into India, and they require energy, they require oil. And as you can see, the Indian rupees has been shooting down. So whenever your local currency is down against the dollar, this means that it is much more expensive for India to buy oil and gas, because oil is traded in US dollars, and they have to. It's why it's called the petrodollar. And because India's value is so low compared to the dollar, they have to pay more for the oil. So I want to show you some other graphs as well. You can see here India's crude oil production. So India does produce a little bit of crude oil, but over the years you can see this is starting to go down and down, and it started to come down around 2016, and it's starting to go down, which means they are having to import more and more oil and more gas as well. And you can see from this chart as well, you can see how India is importing oil and gas year on year, more and more every single year. So how is this going to affect India? How India is going to be affected with all of these high oil and gas prices? The first thing, the tax collection of the government. So India has been reducing the fuel tax and tax collection because of these high oil prices, because they know with the high oil prices, the normal citizens won't be able to afford it. So there's less and less money going into the government because of the less tax they are charging. Secondly, there is a rise in inflation. As you know, the high oil prices means cost of everything goes up, because you pretty much need oil for everything, for factories, for basic goods and services, for cars, everything goes up. So there's a rise in inflation. So inflation is a huge issue in India at the moment. And one of the major issues in India is because there's a huge amount of poor people still in India. There's a lot of people still in poverty. So they won't be able to come out of poverty as long as there is high inflation. So that is a huge issue in India at the moment. You got the higher interest rates. Because of all of this, to combat all of the inflation, the government has to increase the interest rates, otherwise inflation will go out of control. So because of the higher interest rates, there's more issues with the economy. First of all, house prices, the rents, loans, mortgage prices are just going to shoot up, and it's just going to make things harder for the average citizen, and everything, all the prices are going to go up, and their daily costs are just going to go up because of the higher interest rates. So adverse impact on GDP growth. India has been had pretty good GDP growth last year. They have bounced back from the pandemic where they had a minus GDP growth, which was very, very bad for the Indian economy. But they seem to have bounced back. However, it's going to be a huge issue to carry on with the same level of growth. As you know, as oil price increases, the GDP growth will reduce. The cost of businesses are going to rise, which means less profit margins. There's going to be less jobs because companies are going to start saving money. They won't have money to kind of hire more people, so they'll look at cost-cutting exercises. So it's going to affect GDP growth by a lot because of all of this. So as you can see, India is actually a account deficit country, which means it imports more than it exports. It imports a lot of goods from China, but it also imports a lot of energy as well from around the world, especially from Middle East, oil, gas, etc. So the problem is, if the crude oil price stays above $100, the current trade deficit will be larger because they're going to be importing more than they're exporting, which means the price of imports are going to be larger and larger. And this is going to be very detrimental to the price of the rupee. And again, I've showed you the price of the rupee against the dollar, which has been falling over the past 10 years or so. That's just going to put more pressure on the rupee, and that's just going to make it fall even more. And for the rupee to fall even more, it's just a vicious cycle. They're going to have to pay more for imports, and this also means there's going to be higher inflation in India as well. So things are not looking good for India at all. I don't see many other channels talking about this. We all talk about European sanctioning itself, and if Russia stops the gas, and Europe is going to be really heavily affected. Europe's going to have to buy LNG from America and other parts of the world, which is much more expensive. So that is still to come for Europe, but I believe India is probably going to be affected much more, mainly down to its huge population, its growing industry. You can see here, for every $10 rise in oil prices, the current account deficit widens by roughly 0.4% of India's gross domestic product. And don't forget, India has just come out of a very, very bad, severe pandemic where India lost a lot of people. So India doesn't need really high oil prices at this moment. It's really going to affect them severely. There's other sectors as well which will be affected. I think every single sector is going to be affected in India. You got aviation as well. There is a huge aviation sector in India. You got 1.4 billion people in India. You got automobiles, which are going to be heavily affected, and you also have things like transport and supply chains. Everything's going to be higher because of the high oil prices, so the cost of moving things around India is going to be higher. So that brings in the cost of inflation as well, so everything's going to be much more expensive. You got cement. The cost of infrastructure in India is going to get higher, and India needs a lot of infrastructure at the moment. They need roads, they need rail, they need buildings for factories for the industry that's growing. So all of that's going to be affected. So you can see a lot of stuff that gets affected just by raising the oil prices. I'm in an interview with the Indian finance minister, and they asked him about what is the minimum level of oil price for India to be doing well as a country, and he mentioned the $50 a barrel mark. Anything over that, that's when problems start. And $50 is fine for India to compete against the rest of the world, to have a good industry, to make profit, to have good GDP growth, and for the government also to make profit as well, and to have a really good trade deficit, trade surplus. I mean, so I couldn't find that interview, but I have found this article where he says it does $50 worry India, and this article was made a few years ago when oil prices were down to $30. So then it started rising, and Sonal Varma, an economist at Nomura Holdings, said oil at 60, 65, 70, that's when the problems start, but right now I think it's fine. So he even mentions that $50 is the right kind of price for the country to do well, and he also said oil staying at $50 doesn't hurt anyone, but it becomes very serious once it reaches $75 a barrel. But as you know, the oil prices are shooting up recently. They are going up and down. China's in lockdown at the moment, so Shanghai is in lockdown, so there is a less of a demand for oil from China at the moment. But once the lockdown is clear, the oil prices will start shooting up again. Before the lockdowns in China, the oil prices were at $130, $135, even $140 per barrel. And then the lockdowns happen in China, and China is a huge importer of oil. And once the lockdowns have finished in China, I believe there is going to be a huge demand for oil again, especially with all of these sanctions that have been placed on Russia. And I can see the oil prices going up to 130, 140. So this is double than what the economist says would be a level where India will have a problem. So $75 a barrel, he said that's when the serious problems start. And and double that, that's when serious problems start. So India will have to be very, very careful over the next few years, and if the oil prices stay high as they are right now, I can see India having serious economic issues and maybe even heading towards a recession. So let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you in the next video. Look forward to reading your comments. I love reading your comments, so let's have a discussion there. Thank you for this, and I'll see you soon.